I'm sure that you are tired of learning at this point with so many, maybe thousands of hours of Zoom classes draining the life out of you already. But in case that your love of learning hasn't dissipated just yet, or just in case you want to get ahead of your peers by reviewing lecture material ahead of time, this video is here so that I can help you understand and amplify on your abilities to learn by yourself, and most importantly, to be more optimal when you want to learn and make sure to remember everything. In this video, we'll be touching upon 5 categories in order to help you improve on your abilities. We will look at environment and / conditioning, learning techniques, how to read more efficiently, and thinking logically. Remember that these suggestions might not work for everyone, but it is worth a shot. You can try all of these techniques and see which ones work the best for you and adjust your learning experience. I try to support these claims with as much scientific evidence as I possibly can. My resources will be linked in the description. I'm also going to do a vlog series out of this so that I can finish my school year as optimally as I can. I literally only have three more subjects to do, and yeah, at this point I'm already halfway through the week, but you know what, whatever. This is a trailer. You guys can just watch comfortably at home. So for environment and conditioning, I only have a couple of useful tips. They're not acclaimed with scientific evidence, but these are the conditions in which I would recommend you learn by yourself. So first, you are supposed to have a flexible weekly schedule, one where you can come in, come out at certain hours, or you can just push around the times. It is always very reassuring to have a routine and to always have certain hours at which you are going to study at. However, with the Zoom classes already draining the life out of you, I'm pretty sure that you don't want something that you have to do, that you can just tune into whenever you have free time, or you can tune into it for 20 minutes to an hour, or maybe even 2 hours if you're feeling extra motivated that day. Just make sure that you practice it every day, but you have to have a flexible schedule for it. The minimum time per study session of one subject is 1 hour. This is just customary. Maybe you'll be in the flow of things by that hour. You might want to learn more, or if you're just not feeling it, you can just totally do 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So the recommended start for this is either 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. 9 a.m. for us people who are homeschooled or who are on vacation and want to learn a new language, or want to learn a new skill like coding or lettering, or a new subject, and you have nothing to do during the day. 9 a.m. for teenagers is where the brain is most optimal. 5 p.m. in case you have a long morning of classes. If you're in high school or in a system that requires you to have like a 9 to 5, but in this case, very early morning, just you could end up by 2 and have lunch or something. 5 p.m. is just enough because you have had lunch, you have relaxed, you have read something, you have played some video games, I don't know, just done whatever you have to do to relax. And at that point, you're just maybe not in the greatest mood for learning, but you are in great conditions too. Classical music, lo-fi beats, instrumental music, ASMR, sounds, all of that you could totally use for ambience. And it personally helps me detach from reality so that I can focus on the work that I am doing more precisely, more productive. But there's a lot of scientific evidence that supports the claim that silence is the best ambience to focus. So personally, it doesn't help me focus much. It just makes my thoughts a lot more audible than they are. Just use ASMR sounds. What I've been doing is just doing ambience ASMR. There are ASMR channels with videos that are around 2 hours long, and they already have a Pomodoro technique implemented in them, and it's all about environmental ambience. So it could be Lord of the Rings ambience, Harry Potter ambience, etc., etc. So I usually do that, but it relies on how you react to background noise. You should have a specifically assigned study space with all of your necessities close at hand. This because of a reason that we'll talk about later, which is that you should not leave the room or feel compelled to leave the room for any reason, because it's going to break you out of concentration. and it's going to break you out of your stride of learning if you ever enter that. Your brain will start assimilating this space as a space that is designated to studying, and it will condition itself accordingly so that it could help you be more productive while you are in this space. A personal tip that I have for you is that you either study in a space that has a yellow lamp light or a window with natural light, or both. In this case, I have both because natural light is 100 times better than white LEDs or just colored LEDs. Yellow lamp light is actually a lot easier on the eyes than white light, and well, the window is very self-explanatory. If you can put your desk with the window, it'll be a lot better. And if you can use candles, chef's kiss. This is my favorite part of the video, as well as the learning part, as well as the reading part of it. First thing is that you must be in a comfortable and accessible mood so that you don't feel compelled to leave the room. You should be well fed. You should have a bottle of water here, maybe some coffee, maybe tea. You should be warm, well clothed, and if a snack helps you focus better, you should have a snack in here. Also, if you wear glasses, use them. I don't normally use my glasses. You know, you want to be as focused as humanly possible, which leads us to our next point. You either leave your phone on airplane mode, you leave it out of the room, or you use a Pomodoro app. I use Forest because it is bougie as fuck, but you could use the free equivalent of that app. Most of you probably know what Forest is and what those equivalents are, but I'm still going to explain it because that's what everybody does. So Forest is an app that basically helps you focus because you establish a certain time in which you want to be focused. Basically, you could use 25 minutes, 30 minutes, you could go up to 3 hours if you configure the app to that extent. And if you exit the app and if you use your phone in any other way, your tree will die. Nobody wants to kill a tree. And if you complete your cycle of productivity, you will be awarded with something. Forest gives you coins so that you could buy more species of trees. The reward system actually helps stimulate the receptors in your brain that cause happiness, I guess. So you will be happy to be productive. So there's this thing called Parkinson's law, and that is the adage that work expands as to fill the time provided for a certain task. Our next tip is that you have to find an exciting aspect or something that arouses excitement, interest, intrigue in you so that the information sticks and so that you feel better about learning and more interested about learning. Now, if you choose to self-learn, that is actually a lot easier because you have an incentive to want to learn about this. However, if you have a class that you basically only want to be ahead of the class in, that cannot be your only motivation. The motivation has to be inside of the text. This one is the design of a study environment for acquiring academic and professional competence. This one is a 1997 study, and it goes like follows. This is a study that was conducted on students who were learning practically, so students who were learning on the field. The experiential learning theory suggests that learning has a greater impact when it is 1. Accompanied by an optimal amount of emotional arousal, 2. Takes place within an environment of safety, and 3. Is accompanied by adequate processing time and a clear summary providing a cognitive map for understanding the experience. In summary, learning has a greater impact when you're excited or intrigued, or you just have a strong emotion for the content or for what you are learning, when you're in a safe environment for learning, and also when there is either a clear summary, a questionnaire, or enough time for you to process that information later. Another study, which is called the Approaches to Studying and Perceptions of the Learning Environment Across Disciplines. That one basically gave two controlled groups of students, an article to read. Both of these groups aimed to look at first, the deep approach to learning and the surface approach to learning. The deep approach is when you have an interest in the text and so you remember more of it or you understand more of it. And 2, the surface learning, in which you only look for points that you might be tested on. Students who intended to understand the author's meaning adopted what came to be called a deep approach, while those who were more concerned to reproduce isolated pieces of information on which they expected to be tested used a surface approach. Deep approach is associated with intrinsic motivation or interest in the subject itself, while the surface approach is driven by either fear of failure or instrumental motivation. My next tip is for you to relax. Just don't feel like it is a chore. When you feel like you're trudging through something, you either leave it and come back to it later on in the day, or you might come back to it the next day if you studied enough for you to consider that you are satisfied with what you studied during the day. This is from the same study of the two controlled groups of people. Students who had found the article interesting were more likely to have sought a deep approach, and when those who had felt anxious had concentrated on question spotting, so surface approach. If you feel like you have to finish it because you have to finish learning and you have to finish doing this because it's almost the end of the day, or because this is the goal that I set for myself for today, just don't. You are not going to be learning as efficiently as you would have if you were actually interested in the topic. Always comprehend what you are studying and don't skim over parts that you don't understand just because you can come back to them later. This study that I'm going to quote is the first study, the one about students learning in the field. There are two terms in this: unsituated learning, which is learning the theory on your desk, which is the one that we're discussing right now. Situated learning, which is learning in the theory, and this is something that you have to take into consideration because most of what we're doing is remote learning. So we're doing unsituated learning, and that means that we're not going to be able to practice the theory unless we have the means to. Unsituated learning often yields a motivation problem since students often do not see the point of what they are learning. Second, there is an inertness problem because students do not know how to apply what they have learned in real situations. And finally, in unsituated learning, retention is a problem because it is hard to remember abstractions if knowledge is not used in a relevant context. These are some things that we acquire in situated learning that we should apply to unsituated learning. You have to come to understand the purpose of the knowledge that you're learning, learn by actively using knowledge rather than passively receiving it, learn the different conditions under which the knowledge can be applied, and acquire knowledge in dual form, both tied to the context of its use and independent of any particular context, thus promoting its transfer to new problems and new domains. So as long as you understand the information, you can use it for whatever you want. You have to be able to connect the information with real life situations or memories that you have experienced. This is something that reading actually helps with a lot. If I can relate certain things that I'm learning to things that I have already read, or things that I have heard already, or things that I have seen on the news, it helps me remember because I have things to connect it with. So this is for something that you have to do the next day. Every time you come back to study next day, you have to start your session with an overview of what you had studied the day before. That helps you just go over it again. I think it helps with the curve of forgetting. I don't know. But it helps you. Reviewing things helps you remember. Of course it does. And when you constantly review the material that you're going for, it's going to be a lot easier to remember, and you're going to have to study a little less because you're going to be able to remember the information more, and that's always beneficial. Do not attempt to memorize what you don't understand, and look for the adequate moments in which you can memorize things. Don't compare your learning speed to other people's learning speed. Students have different styles of learning. Some students use a serialist strategy. They learn the material step by step, concentrating initially on the details and logical connections within the material and looking for analogies or interconnections only toward the end of the learning process. Other students preferred a holistic strategy in which they build up an overall picture to guide their learning, looked for analogies and related ideas through the process of comprehension learning, and examine the detailed and logical connections only much later on in their attempts to achieve a full understanding. Extreme holists tend to make invalid analogies and reach conclusions prematurely, and persistent serialists make insufficient use of analogies. Their over-reliance on procedural fact-based learning is equivalent to a surface approach. For better comprehension, organize the material chronologically, question or critique the information that is being presented, and make sure to relate other topics to others that you have already learned. So these are a couple of learning approaches. The atomistic approach is the one that we're going to talk about today. The atomistic approach is breaking information down into specific skills or into simpler or smaller concepts so that you can understand deeper. Now, the student exercises these simpler competences correctly and in the right sequence and will go on to combine them into more complex ones. Simpler competences, they are combined in the so-called integration modules or chapters or blocks or lessons, and then integrated as a whole. Mathematics is a perfect example of a field that is highly sequentially and hierarchically ordered. Try to teach or talk about this topic to somebody else, maybe your dog, maybe to a plushie. I used to do that and the information stuck, like I understood the information. Also, if you need it, find somebody to keep you accountable for studying. Find somebody to tell you that you have to study right now. For reading and for what that comes along with, I found this on a scientific study and I found these characteristics that the good reader should have. So first, you must be an active reader, and all of these aspects that, consume what active readers are also in the following bullet points. You must have a clear goal for your reading. You should look over the text before you start reading, recognizing the structure, keywords, vocabulary, names, stuff like that, and identify it as soon as possible so that you know that you're going to have to focus on that when you're reading. Good readers should make predictions on what they're reading. Good readers read selectively, making decisions about what they are reading. So either you should read certain sections quicker, you should read certain sections with a deeper understanding, what you should skim, what you should keep. You should construct, revise, and question the meanings as you read of words, events, concepts. Try to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words as you're reading, filling in the gaps with assumptions or just straight up looking up in the dictionary or in the internet what the word means or what the phrase means. Draw from, compare, and integrate prior knowledge into the reading that you're doing. Think about the authors in the text, their intentions, their stance, their arguments. Evaluate the text's quality and value. You should be able to react intellectually and emotionally to the text accordingly. You should be able to read different kinds of texts differently, which is something that I also advocate to. You should be able to read, for example, in fiction, when you're reading selectively, when you're reading for pleasure, you should be reading a young adult novel with a different standard that you would read a classic or a nonfiction book. There are also 9 very important skills for reading comprehension, which are knowledge of word meanings, ability to select the appropriate meaning for a word or phrase in the light of its particular context, identify antecedents and references in a passage, select the main thought of a passage, answer questions that are specifically answered in a passage, answer questions that are answered in a passage but not in the words in which the question is asked, draw inferences from a passage about its contents, recognize the literary devices and determine the tone and mood, and determine the writer's purpose intent. There are a couple of types of reading. There's a quick revision, the flip through, the comprehensive reading, light reading word by word, and summarizing. All of these readings have different qualities. You must be able to adjust the kind of reading that you want to do for a certain text. So the faster and better reading is actually, okay, this is something that I've been trying to improve on. You're looking at a line of text, right? And when you're looking at a line of text, you're going to only look at 3 points of that line of text. You are going to look and drink up groups of words and do not voice them. This is something you have to train your brain for, because most people still read at the elementary school level, which is reading as though they were saying the words out loud. But instead of that, more advanced readers or readers who are older should be able to just identify certain groups of words, and your brain should be able to process them. But this is something you have to train your brain in for at least a month. Reading like this for around 20 minutes each day is going to help you improve in the long run. Of course, try to be demanding and just push yourself a little bit harder about your reading speed every time you're practicing. And always look up the words that you don't know and write them down in a notebook somewhere, because writing down the meaning of the word is going to help it stick to your brain a little more. So these are the steps for the reading methodology that you should do. So first thing you should do is inspect the table of contents, the subtitles, the chapter information, which is going to help you have an overview of what you're going to be seeing. Question why you would be interested in this particular text, what you're going to be reading, what is the information you wish to gain from the text, And all of this is going to help with, sparking the interest and sparking the motivation from yourself rather than the instrumental motivation of I have to learn this for a test. Read the text, inspect the diagrams, consider the stance or argument in the text. Attempt to remember as much as you can from the lesson when it is over, and you might write a summary somewhere. And the last one is to revise, paying special attention to your weak points or information that didn't stick when you attempted to remember it and summarize it. I'm going to leave a link to a paper that is full of reading tips and tricks. It's full of reading tips and tricks for you. Lastly, I am going to give you some tips on critical learning so that you can optimize your learning experience here in the workplace and basically everywhere you want to learn, or you want to make sure you get something out of the experience that you're in. You always have to be able to think critically and logically. So first tip that I got for you is, you got inductive reasoning, you got deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is where, where detective comes in, and this is how I learned the meaning of deductive reasoning, is that you go from the specific things to the general things. So a detective, Sherlock Holmes, for example, would go there and see like, oh, this pen is angled at a wrong angle. And from that specific detail, he would infer a general situation, like he was writing and then he set it aside. Inductive reasoning is exactly the opposite. You go from a very, very general situation to a very specific aspect. For example, women usually menstruate, so you must menstruate too, when probably that person doesn't usually menstruate. It's a very general thing to say, and then you're applying it to one specific person. Also, make sure to not fall into fallacies, because inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning could very easily fall into fallacies if you don't have the information or the logic supporting it. Look into all angles, theories, or evidence. So I have a friend who had this methodology class, and for this specific kind of paper, he was instructed to look into the opposing angles and use them in his argument in order to create his thesis. And that might also help you understand the situation a lot better, because you see other people's points of view. But if you want to create your own argument on it or your own deduction on it, you must be able to see what other people find wrong with your own argument and be able to debunk those, or just be able to agree to disagree with them. When it comes to problem solving, you have to be able to analyze first and trying to think of a similar situation in which that solution could be applied to, and then finally reflect on the solution that you came to. A study called The Design of a Study Environment for Acquiring Academic and Professional Competence, which is the first one that I mentioned, refers to Russian studies in educational psychology. The most important contribution that the Russian action psychologists make to higher education is their notion of the complete orientation basis, which preferably involves reflection on one's actions. Each time, students will have to ask themselves why they do something and why they do it in the way that they do. Reflection allows the students to explore why something does or does not work so that they can perform adequately in the future. Thank you very much for watching. This is basically the premises under which the vlogs will be based on. This is basically everything that I will try to follow when I'm studying for these things. I'm extremely excited. You have no idea how excited I am. I'm also going to be using these in order to study a lot of other things like languages or philosophy in itself, or just reading in general and learning out of everything that I want to read. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. You could subscribe if you want. You could like this video, you could comment on it. I'll try to have this video out as soon as humanly possible. I love you all. Goodbye.